Gravity, kinetic energy, and structural stress do not respect national borders. A snapped cable dropping a multi-ton load crushes concrete and human bone with exactly the same force in New York as it does in Sydney. The physical mechanics of an industrial accident are universal. How governments penalize those mechanics varies sharply. In the United States, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, enforces a highly prescriptive, standard-based compliance model. Employers consult detailed codes to locate exact required guardrail heights, chemical labeling rules, and procedural checklists. Australia operates under a different legal philosophy. The Work Health and Safety Framework, WHS, uses a principle-based duty of care model. Instead of relying on prescriptive codes, the law places the burden on the PCBU, the person conducting a business or undertaking, to proactively manage risks. This animated meter charts the stark difference in financial exposure between the two systems. A top-tier civil fine under US OSHA caps near $165,514. An Australian industrial manslaughter conviction calculates executive negligence, allowing penalties to scale rapidly past $10 million. We are conducting a forensic audit of the 5 most critical safety failures in heavy industry. By examining recent case law, we will compare how the US standard-based system and the Australian duty of care model investigate, prosecute, and penalize identical operational mistakes. A single failure to isolate power or secure a trench is no longer treated as an administrative cost of doing business. It acts as a direct threat to corporate capital and executive freedom. Fall protection remains the most frequently cited safety violation globally. Workers constructing commercial high-rises or maintaining industrial scaffolding face constant vertical exposure. Under OSHA Standard 1926.501, U.S. compliance emphasizes providing and utilizing personal protective equipment. Securing a lanyard and donning a harness satisfies the immediate prescriptive requirement to arrest a potential fall. This 3D diagram demonstrates the contrast with the Australian WHS hierarchy of control. While the U.S. model accepts the harness as a primary defense, WHS principles mandate eliminating the vertical hazard entirely with a solid physical guardrail before relying on worker-worn PPE. Providing harnesses without installing physical barriers leaves the core hazard intact. If a worker fails to clip in or a harness degrades, gravity takes over. In civil courts, juries interpret missing guardrails as a failure to engineer safety. A recent scaffolding fall in Pennsylvania resulted from missing guardrails after multiple worker complaints. The resulting civil lawsuit yielded a $12 million settlement, overriding the standard regulatory fine data. Relying on PPE compliance transfers the final safety burden to the worker. Failing to implement engineered safety controls exposes the firm to multi-million-dollar negligence lawsuits that dwarf the initial administrative citations. Heavy manufacturing relies on massive kinetic and electrical forces. During maintenance, that energy often remains trapped inside overhead cranes and complex steel equipment. OSHA 1910.147 provides a strict step-by-step prescriptive checklist for Lockout, Tagout, or LOTO procedures. It dictates exactly how to de-energize equipment, isolate the power source, and apply physical locks to prevent accidental startups. Australia approaches this through a performance-based duty of care. The legal requirement is achieving actual hazard elimination rather than just completing a checklist. If a machine can still move, the PCBU has failed their legal duty regardless of the paperwork filed. 2 recent Western Australian cases illustrate the severity of this duty. At WA Salt Group and Whamco, workers performed routine maintenance near unguarded plant mechanisms. Isolation procedures were bypassed. The trapped kinetic energy caught the workers, resulting in fatalities and fines approaching $1 million each. Using verbal warnings or assuming a machine is off, instead of applying a physical lock, demonstrates a conscious disregard for life. Courts view this choice as a criminal act of recklessness, stripping away any defense of accidental negligence. Bypassing physical locks in favor of human communication guarantees a critical failure. Guessing the power is off is the most legally and financially destructive decision a maintenance manager can make. Excavation relies on displacing mass. A single cubic yard of soil weighs roughly 3,000 pounds. When a trench wall collapses, that weight moves instantly, making cave-ins fatal regardless of the legal jurisdiction where the digging occurs. The U.S. requires a designated competent person on site to classify soil and authorize entry. Australia mandates strict documentation through a Safe Work Method Statement, or SWMS, requiring written proof that the risks of high-risk construction work are actively controlled. This soil mechanics simulation illustrates the immense pressure at work. Arrows indicate the massive weight vectors pressing inward. When the soil wall reaches its structural threshold, it collapses. The U.S. Department of Labor enforces zero tolerance for ignoring these physics, recently levying a $1.2 million fine against a contractor. If an employer continues digging without shoring, the citation automatically upgrades to a willful violation in the U.S. framework. Soil does not compromise. Ignoring its immutable physics to save operational time guarantees either catastrophic regulatory intervention or a fatal collapse. Kinetic accidents are immediate, but latent health hazards operate on a delay. In large-scale chemical plants and industrial processing facilities, workers inhale respirable dust and toxic vapors that slowly degrade lung tissue. Australia has adopted an aggressive regulatory stance toward airborne toxins, implementing a total ban on engineered stone to eliminate silica exposure. OSHA relies on a targeted enforcement method, increasing the frequency of site inspections to catch silica dust violations. At Orica, Australia's manufacturing facility, management allowed workers to be exposed to cobalt dust without adequate atmospheric monitoring or exposure controls. This environment persisted for 5 full years. This timeline tracks that 5-year chemical exposure period. The continuous inhalation of cobalt dust culminated in a sudden spike of irreversible lung sensitization diagnoses. The regulator issued a $1.2 million penalty, classifying the prolonged exposure as Category 1 reckless conduct. Ignoring long-term worker health liabilities creates a ticking financial time bomb. A company can operate profitably for a decade, only to be bankrupted by the compounded health failures resulting from their initial exposure practices. A signed Safe Work Method Statement or a passing compliance audit provides a false sense of security. Many operations assume that possessing the correct safety documentation equates to legal immunity. Regulators in both the US and Australia actively hunt for the gap between a written policy and the actual cultural execution in the field. A binder full of unread safety protocols provides zero protection on a live worksite. Discovering a discrepancy between paper compliance and field reality triggers severe legal escalation. In the US, it upgrades a standard citation to a willful violation. In Australia, it triggers a Category 1 offense. Narrowland Pools operated a construction site where the safety management system existed almost entirely on paper. Workers performed high-risk tasks without implementing the controls listed in their own documents, resulting in a worker's death. This organizational chart overlays the timeline of ignored near misses on that site. As liability flows upward, the nodes turn red, reaching the C-suite. The court labeled the safety oversights flagrant and glaring, resulting in a massive $1.5 million industrial manslaughter conviction. Courts penalize operational reality, not ink on paper. When safety culture fails on the ground, the legal system holds executives personally and criminally liable. Mere compliance is the absolute baseline. Aiming only for the legal minimum leaves an industrial operation one variable away from disaster. Terminology and acronyms differ across borders. However, the physical hazards of heavy industry and the resulting financial attrition of a failure remain universal. This bar chart compares the ultimate limits of both systems. OSHA civil fines max near $165,000, but the Australian framework starts at $10 million for corporate fines and extends to industrial manslaughter charges carrying 25 years in prison. The data forces a reevaluation of how safety is managed globally. We must ask whether prescriptive checklists or a proactive duty of care framework best protects workers. Which system do you think is more effective at preventing accidents? Prescriptive OSHA rules or Australia's duty of care? Comment below. To learn more about workplace safety and OSHA rules, subscribe to HSE Study.